It was the evening of Wednesday, the 7th of April, 1779, in the parish of St. Paul, Covent Garden, London. A fine mist hung in the air above the cobblestones, damp with recent rain. Gas lamps flickered along the piazza, casting uneven light across the theatre crowds that gathered near the portico of the Royal Theatre. The smell of coal smoke drifted from nearby chimneys, mingling with the perfume of ladies and the sharper scent of horses waiting in their traces. At 10:30, the doors of the theatre opened and the audience began to emerge. They had attended a performance of Love in a Village, a comic opera of no particular distinction, and the mood was pleasant, unremarkable. Among those departing was a woman of some refinement, known to many as Miss Martha Ray. She was 40 years of age, elegantly dressed in a gown of dark silk, a shawl draped across her shoulders. She moved with the ease of one accustomed to society, though her position in it had always been irregular. She had lived nearly 20 years as mistress to John Montague, the 4th Earl of Sandwich, and had borne him 9 children. She was known for her beauty, her talent for music, and her quiet dignity. A carriage waited for her near the corner of the piazza. The horses stood calm, their breath visible in the cool air. Attendants moved about, calling for coaches, and the night seemed to proceed as any other might. Miss Ray spoke briefly with her companion, Signora Galli, a singer of some reputation, and began to make her way toward the waiting carriage. It was the last time she would walk freely beneath the London sky. The Reverend James Hackman had spent much of that day alone in his lodgings at Duke's Court, a narrow passage just off St. Martin's Lane, no more than a quarter-mile from the theatre. He had taken the rooms only days earlier, upon his return to London from his parish in Wiveton, a village on the North Norfolk coast, where he served as curate. He was 27 years of age, slight of build, with dark hair, and a manner that those who knew him described as courteous, but increasingly unsettled. That morning he had read sermons. He sat by the window with the pages open before him, though whether he absorbed their meaning or merely turned them mechanically, no record shows. He took no visitors. He ate little. By noon he had received word that Miss Martha Ray would attend the theatre that evening, and the knowledge appeared to unsettle him further. He had known Miss Ray for some years. They had met during his time as an officer in the 68th Regiment of Foot, when he had been stationed near Hinchingbrooke House, the ancestral seat of the Earl of Sandwich. Miss Ray had lived there as the Earl's mistress, and Mr. Hackman had been invited to dine on occasion, as was the custom with visiting officers of respectable standing. He had become infatuated with her almost immediately. Over the following months, his attentions had grown more persistent. He wrote letters. He visited when he could. He proposed marriage repeatedly, though she declined each time with polite firmness. Eventually, at her suggestion, he had left the army and taken holy orders, securing the living at Wiveton through connections she helped to arrange. Whether this was done to calm him or to create distance, no one could say, but the separation had not lessened his attachment. If anything, it had intensified. He wrote to her still. He visited London when he was able. He spoke of her constantly to his friends, who grew concerned at the fervour in his voice and the wildness in his eyes. By evening he had made his decision. He dressed in his best clothes, a dark coat and waistcoat, and left his lodgings. He walked toward Covent Garden, his hands thrust deep into his pockets. Mr. Hackman had purchased the pistols some months earlier, though the exact date was not recorded. They were gentlemen's weapons, small enough to be concealed, well made but unremarkable. He had kept them in a case in his rooms, along with powder and shot. On the morning of the 7th, he had taken them out, examined them, and loaded them both with deliberate care. He placed them in the pockets of his coat and left them there throughout the day. He arrived at the theatre shortly after the performance had begun. He stood for some time outside, watching the entrance, then moved closer. He saw Miss Ray step down from her carriage earlier that evening, her movements graceful, her expression calm. She had not seen him. He watched her enter the building, then purchased a ticket and followed her inside. He took a seat in the gallery, though he could not see the stage clearly from where he sat. Witnesses later stated that he appeared distracted, agitated. He did not remain for the full performance. After perhaps an hour, he rose and left the building. He returned to his lodgings. He sat in the darkened room alone with his thoughts. The pistols remained in his coat. He did not remove them. After some time, he stood, put his hat on, and walked back toward the theatre. It was nearly 10:30 when he arrived. The performance was ending. Crowds began to gather near the entrance, waiting for carriages, calling for servants. Mr. Hackman stood at the edge of the piazza, near the corner where the stone steps led down toward the street. He watched the doors. He waited. When Miss Ray emerged, he did not hesitate. He moved forward through the crowd, pushing past those who stood between them. She was speaking with Signora Galli, preparing to step into her carriage. Mr. Hackman reached into his coat. He drew one of the pistols. He raised it. There was no warning, no word spoken. He fired directly at her head. The sound echoed across the piazza. Miss Ray collapsed instantly, without a cry. The crowd fell silent, then erupted into confusion. Mr. Hackman raised the second pistol to his own head and fired, but the shot went wide, grazing his temple. A gentleman named Mr. McNamara had been standing beside Miss Ray, assisting her toward the carriage. When the shot was fired, he believed at first that she had fainted. He reached out to steady her, then realized that his hands were covered in blood. He called for help. Several men rushed forward. They lifted Miss Ray and carried her into the Shakespeare Tavern, which stood adjacent to the theatre. Her body was laid upon a bench. Her shawl was removed. The wound in her forehead was immediately visible, a small dark hole above her left eye. A surgeon named Mr. Dennis O'Brien was among the crowd. He knelt beside the body and examined it. He placed his hand against her neck, feeling for a pulse. There was none. He lifted her eyelids, observed the stillness of her pupils, and stood. He stated to those gathered that Miss Ray was dead, that the shot had been fatal, and that death had occurred within seconds of the injury. The bullet, he noted, had entered the forehead and lodged behind the left ear. There was nothing to be done. Meanwhile, Mr. Hackman had been seized by constables. He had been struck several times by men in the crowd, who had torn the pistol from his hand and forced him to the ground. He was bleeding from the wound on his temple, though it was shallow. He did not resist. He was taken into the Shakespeare Tavern, where he was held in a separate room while initial questioning began. He gave his name. He stated his occupation. He admitted the act. He wept openly and said repeatedly that he wished to die. Within the hour, Sir John Fielding, the magistrate at Bow Street, was informed of the incident. He ordered that Mr. Hackman be held overnight and that the body of Miss Ray be examined by a coroner. The pistols were collected and sealed. Witnesses were asked to remain available for questioning. By midnight, the tavern had been cleared. The body of Miss Ray was removed to a nearby house, where it would remain until the inquest. On the morning of Thursday, the 8th of April, Mr. Hackman was brought before Sir John Fielding at the Bow Street Magistrates' Court. To protect him from public curiosity and the hostility of the crowd, Sir John arranged for the examination to be conducted in private. Mr. Hackman appeared in considerable distress. The wound on his temple had been bandaged, but his face was pale and he trembled visibly. He wept throughout much of the proceedings, and was unable at times to speak coherently. Sir John addressed him with compassion, though the law required firmness. He reminded Mr. Hackman that he was accused of a grave crime and that he must compose himself as best he could. Mr. Hackman nodded, but could not control his tears. He said that he understood the charge and that he did not dispute the facts. He admitted that he had fired the shot that killed Miss Ray. He said that he had intended to take his own life immediately afterward, but had failed. He expressed deep remorse and stated that he wished only for the proceedings to conclude so that he might face his punishment. Sir John questioned him regarding his intentions. He asked whether the act had been planned or whether it had occurred in a moment of passion. Mr. Hackman replied that he had been in great torment for many weeks, that he had struggled with his thoughts, and that he could no longer endure the pain of his unrequited attachment. He stated that he had carried the pistols with him that day because he had resolved to end both Miss Ray's life and his own. A letter was found in Mr. Hackman's coat pocket, addressed to his brother-in-law, Mr. Frederick Booth. In it, he had written that he could no longer bear the torment of his feelings, that he had struggled with madness, and that he hoped to find peace in death. He asked for forgiveness and expressed his sorrow for the pain he would cause. The letter was read aloud in court and entered into evidence. At the conclusion of the examination, Sir John stated that there was sufficient evidence to charge Mr. Hackman with the wilful murder of Miss Martha Ray. On the morning of Friday, the 16th of April, 1779, the trial of the Reverend James Hackman began at the Old Bailey. He stood accused of the wilful murder of Miss Martha Ray. He was brought into the courtroom under guard and took his place in the dock. He wore the same dark coat he had worn on the night of the crime, now stained and wrinkled. His head was still bandaged. The first witness called was Mr. McNamara. He stated that he had been assisting Miss Ray toward her carriage when he heard a pistol fire. He said that Miss Ray had clutched her forehead and collapsed immediately. He had thought at first that she had fainted, but when he attempted to lift her, he saw that his hands were covered in blood. He stated that he had then heard a second shot and had turned to see Mr. Hackman fall to the ground. He said that he had asked Mr. Hackman why he had shot the lady, and that Mr. Hackman had replied that it was not the proper place to ask. Mr. Anderson, another witness, testified that he had seen Mr. Hackman approach Miss Ray with 2 pistols in his hands. He stated that Mr. Hackman had fired one pistol at Miss Ray and had then immediately turned the other upon himself. Mr. Mahon, an apothecary who had been present, stated that he had seen Mr. Hackman beating himself with the pistol after the second shot had failed to kill him. He said that he and a constable had restrained Mr. Hackman and had taken the pistol from his hand. Mr. O'Brien, the surgeon, gave his testimony regarding the examination of Miss Ray's body. He stated that the bullet had entered her forehead and had lodged behind her left ear. He said that in his opinion, death had been instantaneous and that there was no possibility that she could have survived the injury. The prosecution then rested. Judge Blackstone invited Mr. Hackman to speak. He read from a prepared statement saying that he had not pleaded guilty initially because he felt it necessary for the court and the public to understand fully what had occurred. Mr. Davenport, who represented Mr. Hackman, argued that his client had suffered from temporary insanity and that the crime had not been premeditated in the legal sense. He read aloud the letter that had been found in Mr. Hackman's pocket, pointing to the language of madness and despair. He urged the jury to consider that Mr. Hackman had been driven beyond reason by the intensity of his passion and that he had acted in a state of mental derangement. Judge Blackstone summarized the evidence. He noted that the law did not permit passion, however intense, to excuse murder. He said that while the court might feel compassion for Mr. Hackman's suffering, the facts were clear and the verdict must follow from them. The jury withdrew. They returned within minutes. The foreman stood and pronounced the verdict, guilty of willful murder. Judge Blackstone then sentenced Mr. Hackman to death by hanging. He stated that the execution would take place at Tyburn, and that the body would afterward be delivered to the surgeons for dissection, as the law required. Mr. Hackman received the sentence without protest. He bowed slightly and was led from the courtroom. On the morning of Monday, the 19th of April, 1779, James Hackman was taken by cart from Newgate Prison to the gallows at Tyburn. He was accompanied by 2 clergymen who prayed with him during the journey. Witnesses reported that he appeared calm, though deeply affected. He spoke little. When the cart reached the scaffold, he stepped down and mounted the platform. The noose was placed around his neck. He prayed briefly, then signalled that he was ready. The cart was drawn away. James Hackman was hanged. His body was taken down after the customary time and delivered to the surgeons. The case provoked considerable public discussion. Some newspapers portrayed Mr. Hackman as a victim of romantic torment undone by love. Others saw him as a selfish man who had destroyed an innocent life to satisfy his own despair. Miss Ray was mourned by many who had known her. She was buried quietly, and the Earl of Sandwich, who had been devastated by her death, withdrew from public life for a time. The file remains in the records of the Old Bailey, bound in leather and stored among thousands of others. The names are written in careful script: Hackman, James, Ray, Martha. The date is noted. The verdict is recorded. Beyond that, only silence. The theatre still stands. The piazza is unchanged. People pass through it daily, unaware that beneath their feet blood once pooled on the stones. The story faded, the names were forgotten, and London carried on.